Summatory and December surprises in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty. Mikhail Gorbachev meets with President Reagan and President-elect Bush on Governor's Island in New York Harbor. Gorbachev mounting a new troops and weapons reduction offensive. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. On a stunning sun-splashed day in New York, Mikhail Gorbachev makes a splash of his own, talking up Soviet troop reductions. In private at a three-way summit, before a world audience at the United Nations. Gorbachev wasted no time in delivering his headline grabber of the day.
The Soviet Union has taken a decision to reduce its armed forces. Within the next 2 years, their numerical strength will be reduced by 500,000 men. The numbers of conventional armaments will also be substantially reduced.
Gorbachev's arms and charms offensive was light years away from the belligerence and bluster of Nikita Khrushchev at the UN almost 3 decades earlier. Still, in his own polished way, Gorbachev tried to dominate and set the agenda for what came next. The three-way summit, Gorbachev, Reagan, Bush, together on a tiny island. Gorbachev denied that his troop-cut proposals were being met by Kremlin hardliner resistance at home. He came close to saying, "Read my lips."
Нет. No. Нет. No. Нет. Thank you. No.
The summit and superpower lunch lasted 2 hours. And how did it go?
Read our smile. Read our smile.
Now, to help flesh out our coverage of this extraordinary day of summitry and surprises, our man in Moscow, Barry Peterson, is here in New York this week to begin our coverage of the Gorbachev gambit.
It was a crystal clear dawn, a gift to Mikhail Gorbachev here to paint a picture of a new Soviet Union. His motorcade sped through rush hour Manhattan, arriving at the United Nations where Raisa flashed the first smile and Gorbachev got his first ever look at this world body. Gorbachev picked the UN as his stage. He practically invited himself here. And when the curtain went up, he was more than ready to deliver.
The Soviet leadership has decided to demonstrate once again its readiness to reinforce this healthy process not only by words but also by deeds.
The first deed, unilateral troop reduction, slashing 500,000 troops from its total force of 5 million over the next 2 years. The second deed, pulling 50,000 Soviet troops as well as tanks and other equipment out of Eastern Europe.
Today,
the challenge was clear. The Soviets have made a move. Will the Americans follow suit? But it may spell trouble back home. The popular Soviet Chief of Staff, Sergei Akrameyev, retired today, reportedly for health reasons. But it may be an ominous sign that many in the military don't support Gorbachev's decision. And there was more. On cutting nuclear arms, let's get on with it, he said, and offered a thinly veiled invitation to a superpower summit.
Prerequisites exist to make 1989 a decisive year.
On Afghanistan, the offer of a ceasefire on January 1st and a request for UN peacekeeping troops. One had to remember that it came from a country with a history of scorn for the UN. He said Yasser Arafat should have been allowed to address the UN in New York, saying it while Secretary of State George Shultz, the man who denied Arafat a visa, sat in the audience. On human rights, he cited changes in Soviet law and letting Jews emigrate as another example of the new Soviet Union.
This removes from the agenda the problem of so-called refuseniks.
The man on center stage got the applause he wanted, then was off to Governor's Island to get the reaction from his most important audience, lunch with President Reagan and President-elect Bush.
This is Bill Plant on Governor's Island. From the United Nations, the leader of the Soviet Union made his way to the mini-summit meeting the old-fashioned way, as aircraft flew high above, writing a welcome message in smoke on the wind. President Reagan was there, ready with the kind of greeting reserved for those who have long since taken one another's measure. And Vice President Bush, appearing eager to step into his new role. Everyone was all smiles and optimism and ready for the camera.
We've accomplished much. There are other things still to do.
Inside, the first questions were all to Mr. Gorbachev, who had seized the day's agenda with his UN announcement of military cuts.
First of all, I have explained that we are taking these steps unilaterally.
Over lunch, a discussion of human rights, Afghanistan, and the Soviet Union's own internal problems, as well as the Gorbachev plan for troop cuts, which Mr. Reagan welcomed.
That wasn't a proposal, that was a decision that has been made.
And what do you think of that decision, sir?
Naturally, I heartily approve.
George Bush, just 6 weeks from the Oval Office, today was still the loyal vice president.
Or what the president said.
The Secretary of State, while pointing out that Mr. Gorbachev's military cuts would still leave the Soviets with superior strength, seemed nonetheless optimistic about the relationship.
Oh, I don't know whether you want to say that's the end of the Cold War or not, but it's different, a lot different, and from my taste, a lot better.
Because this is a time of transition in the U.S. government with neither Mr. Reagan nor Mr. Bush in any position to make any kind of deal, the U.S. wanted this really to be a kind of extended photo opportunity. Mr. Gorbachev obviously had different ideas, but in the end, the passing of the torch to George Bush was exactly what the White House got. The three men stopped before they left to gaze across the harbor at the Statue of Liberty, shuffling about with an interpreter on the makeshift platform for the cameras. Then, at the dock, a last goodbye for these two men who had come so far on what seemed so improbable a journey.
And still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, a look at Gorbachev's troubles at home and elsewhere as he visits New York. Tom Fenton on the Estonian collision course with the Kremlin. And the dangerous days of the Soviet soldiers in Afghanistan.
I don't intend to grow old gracefully. I intend to fight it every step of the way. I'm going to be 40 and wonderful. Wonderful with oil of Olay. It fills in for fluid you lose with time, adding fullness where your skin starts to show age. Like my first laugh lines, which weren't so funny. Oil of Olay penetrates quickly, plumps them up. Your skin looks softer, younger. I'm not budging. 40 is prime time.
Irregularity used to be a problem for me. But what was I to do? Call the principal and say I can't teach today because I'm constipated? She'd probably say try a laxative. And I'd stand in front of my history class hoping to make it to recess. And then I found the answer. Daily fiber therapy with Metamucil. It's not a harsh chemical, so it doesn't shock my system. It's fiber, natural, soluble fiber. And fiber is what helps keep us regular in the first place. But I wasn't getting enough. Metamucil gives me the extra fiber I need to get regular and stay that way, safely and naturally. It's like I've signed a peace treaty with my insides. And that old feeling, it's history.
Metamucil, and you could stay regular for the rest of your life.
The Remington microscreen shaves as close as a blade, or your money back. The first screen shaves incredibly close. The second even closer. Shaves as close as a blade, or your money back. Now, lowest price ever on Remington microscreen rechargeable.
Today's Gorbachev surprise, his before the summit started Soviet troop production proposal, is being studied word for word by world leaders and others. Here's an early sampling of first impressions and reactions.
Well, I'm cautious. I'm always wary. We've had a long history with the Soviet Union. They haven't always made good on everything that they have said, but I don't want to pour cold water on what Mr. Gorbachev has said he's going to do here. I think it's a forthcoming gesture, and if in fact he carries it out, it will be a significant one.
I think that we respond to it by saying that we think this was a constructive move, that it was surprising and welcomed, that we hope that the reduction will come out of forces in Eastern Europe and that the resources will be transferred out of the military to the civilian sector, and that we welcome this kind of initiative.
Well, they're long overdue. From the point of view of the Soviets themselves, the massive spending on the military that has prevented their economy from developing has driven Gorbachev to reductions, and I think we'll see even more reductions in the future.
What he has proposed is as consistent with an attempt to split Europe away from us by creating obstacles to any effort to modernize and to improve our strategic position, as it is with a genuine attempt to negotiate a real solution of the tensions between us.
There was no pressing on substantive details. I made clear to the General Secretary that I certainly wanted to continue the progress that's been made in the Reagan administration with the Soviets. And I also made clear that we needed some time, and he understood that.
It wasn't all symmetry and surprises for the Gorbachevs today, and it was a far cry from Nikita Khrushchev's assessment 28 years ago of life in New York as enough to make a stone cry. For the Gorbachevs today, making the New York scene was more like leaving no stone unturned. CBS News correspondent Bob Schieffer begins our coverage of the Gorbachev whirl.
Mrs. Reagan arrived late after guest of honor Raisa Gorbachev, but there were smiles all round at a lunch given by the wife of the UN Secretary General. Mrs. Gorbachev said she was looking forward to seeing the Big Apple. No sign today of the much-touted feud between Mrs. Gorbachev and the American First Lady. And on the way out, Mrs. Reagan had the first review of how it went. The lunch was all very proper, but when Mrs. Gorbachev went crosstown to visit cosmetics queen Estee Lauder, all decked out in purple, she got a taste of the New York press. She tried some small talk.
The weather is beautiful. The weather is fine.
But as Mrs. Gorbachev tried to talk, the reporter kept asking, have you brought a message of peace? What about peace?
The Americans.
What about peace? Peace is here.
So there. But Mrs. Gorbachev did patiently say, we all have to work for peace. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, New York.
This is Richard Schlesinger at the World Trade Center, where Gorbachev came after his power lunch to meet his wife and to start the sightseeing part of their trip. At the entrance to the tallest building in New York, Gorbachev was clearly impressed.
This is a unique city, a city of very special identity and architecture.
Even though the Gorbachevs have been rushed through New York in a heavily guarded motorcade, they've still been able to get a feel for the city.
We are very pleased by the fact that thousands of New Yorkers have come out to welcome us. We saw their faces. We saw their eyes. We saw their friendliness.
It's a big city, and Gorbachev can see and do whatever he wants.
Well, let me do this. We'll go and take stock of the first day and think about the second day.
Gorbachev decided to meet some New Yorkers personally in Times Square, the heart of the city.
I don't believe
It takes time to get your gal to see the light. It takes time. It isn't always love at sight. From the first little glance till she's ready for romance. Remember, little man, it takes time. It takes time to make the coffee percolate. It takes time to get your gal to set the date. From the first moonlit walk till you get the baby talk.
The Elegance Collection from Citizen.
Yeah.
Oh, look at me back in the 60s, working up a sweat. Oh, and that's how I used to pump iron. Not today. Today we're exercising more and eating less red meat. But red meat is a great source of iron.
Only Kellogg's Bran Flakes has high fiber and 100% of the iron recommended today.
So now I pump a little iron outside and inside. You know, I haven't felt this good since I burned that bathing suit.
Kellogg's Bran Flakes.
There's only one place you'll find the all-cotton Color-Mate bath towel. It's thick, thirsty, and baby soft. Comes in these great colors for only $3.99. And there's more during our wonderful white sale, only at Sears.
Great news. I don't need surgery for my hemorrhoids. The doctor said they're not that serious. He said use Preparation H.
Preparation H helps shrink swelling of tissues as it often relieves pain and itching for hours.
Aren't you glad you didn't need surgery?
Preparation H.
Back inside now in our main newsroom with today's other news. Jailed South African black nationalist Nelson Mandela is one step closer to freedom tonight. The ailing Mandela was moved from a hospital clinic to a home at a prison farm near Cape Town. His family, it is said, will have unlimited access. There is speculation the next move may be Mandela's release. PLO leader Yasser Arafat may or may not have explicitly recognized Israel's right to exist today. Depends on the viewpoint. At a Stockholm news conference, Arafat endorsed a joint statement to that effect after meeting with a group of American Jews. But he avoided repeating the statement's key clauses. Still, the leader of the Jewish group called it a clear PLO recognition of Israel. An aide to Israel's prime minister called it, and I quote, a publicity stunt. A powerful and from all indications a disastrous earthquake ripped through eastern Turkey and Soviet Armenia today. The Soviet news agency TASS reports severe devastation in several Armenian cities. TASS said it was the region's strongest earthquake in 80 years. From New York, Mikhail Gorbachev sent a telegram of condolences, and a spokesman said there was considerable loss of life. Gorbachev talked today of the great impact of two revolutions, 1789 in France, 1917 in Russia. Then he mentioned a third, 1988, the Soviet Union, his own, as he sees it, crusade of perestroika. He openly acknowledged that economic reform, perestroika, is stirring opposition at home, and one of the republics he rules was providing a timely case in point, as Tom Fenton reports tonight in our continuing series, The Winter of Discontent.
Estonian demonstrators braved the biting cold to back their local government in its confrontation with the Kremlin. Even as Gorbachev was traveling to the United States, the Estonian parliament was defying him, reaffirming its claim to overrule decrees from Moscow, with some of the demonstrators openly demanding secession from the Soviet Union. These Estonian demonstrations are pretty calm compared to the ethnic riots in the southern republics of Azerbaijan and Armenia, but the threat to Gorbachev's rule is just as great. What the Estonians want is to break away from Moscow's control, and that threatens the unity of the Soviet Union.
The Soviet system, it's something abnormal, absolutely abnormal. It's abnormal. It's a mistake of history.
It was Gorbachev's reforms that prompted Estonians to speak out. They were pleased with the opportunities to open small private businesses. There are more than 300 in Tallinn alone. But many Estonians are angry that Russian-run factories are polluting their rural landscape. They also resent the flood of Russian immigrants who are swamping the local Estonian population.
We can't compete with Russians having more babies.
Estonians insist they are not Russians. They cling romantically to Estonian national traditions. But when local craftsmen manufacture hammers and sickles, that should not be mistaken as a concession to Moscow. These men are members of the Heritage Society, a front for a campaign for independence from the Soviet Union. They meet in cellars and attics and restore national monuments that the Russians smashed when they annexed the Baltic republics 50 years ago. The Russians have held down the Estonians ever since, suffocating religion and imposing the lifestyle of the workers' paradise. But now, Estonians have had enough.
We haven't anything to lose, but only chains.
But the Russians insist they're here to stay. Their factories here are among the most productive in the Soviet Union, and the Russian workers enjoy Estonia's higher living standards. Russians also like the European atmosphere. The annual Tallinn Fashion Spectacular is the closest most Soviets will get to European affluence. But it's also entertainment. There's little of that in the rest of the Soviet Union. The future is now, says the song, but right now there's an acute gasoline shortage, and that irks everyone. Estonians believe the gas shortage is punishment for their attitude towards Gorbachev's version of the future, and they fear he's only just begun to crack down on them. Just outside Tallinn, in the corner of a stonemason's yard, is a statue of Lenin that has become a daily joke. Ordered 2 years ago by an Estonian town council, it's now no longer wanted.
Yes, Lenin for sale.
Fashions change fast these days, and this Russian is clearly going out of style in Estonia. Tom Fenton, CBS News, Tallinn, Estonia.
It now turns out that the picture-perfect landing of Space Shuttle Atlantis last night didn't show the whole picture. Bruce Hall reports on NASA's concern about damage to the shuttle's heat shield tiles and what might have caused it.
About 50 of the most critical heat shield tiles on the underbelly of the shuttle Atlantis were badly pocked and gouged. The tiles protect the shuttle during the fiery re-entry, when temperatures can reach 2,300 degrees. After studying these videotapes, NASA engineers believe Atlantis was hit by debris from the solid rocket boosters or from insulation from the huge external fuel tank, moments after the boosters separated. NASA officials knew about the damage, but decided not to end the flight early because there was no immediate danger to the astronauts. In orbit, more trouble. An air conditioning unit malfunctioned, sending nearly 2 gallons of water floating through the cabin. The astronauts had to use a toilet vacuum to suck up the water, keeping it from reaching the critical electrical circuits. The incidents are not expected to delay future shuttle missions. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Johnson Space Center.
Rock and roll music pioneer Roy Orbison died last night in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Roy Orbison was 52. He died of a heart attack. Orbison recorded 27 straight hits in the early 1960s. He once estimated he had sold 30 million records. His early and biggest hits included Only the Lonely and Pretty Woman.
Heartburn flaring up.
Time to doctor that cough with Robitussin.
Look, Mom's feeling better.
Robitussin, recommended by more doctors, pharmacists, and Dr. Mom.
We reported earlier that Mikhail Gorbachev is now seeking an Afghanistan ceasefire effective New Year's Day. For now, no Soviet troops are homeward bound. CBS News recently had camera crews inside Afghanistan, and tonight, the portrait of one Soviet soldier made to play the still dangerous waiting game as our exclusive series, Afghanistan, The Soviet Failure, continues. The start of another day in Afghanistan. There are 69 days until the Soviet withdrawal is scheduled to be completed. It's the custom for Soviet soldiers to wrap their feet in clean flour sacks to prevent blisters. It doesn't always work. Meet Georgy Plasevich. He's part of a motorized rifle battalion. His unit's job is keeping the road north open, the road to the Soviet Union, the road home. I often daydream to keep my mind off Afghanistan, he says. I imagine how I will come home, how I will open the door and enter the room, and all of a sudden, the dream is gone.
Recommended today.
So now, I pump a little iron outside and inside. You know, I haven't felt this good since I burned that bathing suit.
Kellogg's Bran Flakes.
This is CBS.
I quit. Don't bother. We're out of